Hi everyone, it's Monday, and that means it is time for another Mad History Monday. My name is Megan, and every Monday I research an interesting story that happened in history, and then I talk about it. From now on, I think I will be uploading a Mad History Monday every other Monday, because research takes time, and I feel like I've been rushing, and I don't really want that, so yeah. Every other Monday will be a Mad History Monday from now on. Yay! Okay, let's get into this week's story. So since we are starting off in the World War II era, I put some victory rolls in the hair this week because it was a very popular hairstyle at the time. September 1945, World War II was over. Japan offered its formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, and U.S. General Douglas MacArthur accepted. But for one man, the war was not over. When Hiroo Onoda was 18 years old, he joined the Japanese Imperial Army soon after in 1942. He began specialized training at the Nakano School, Japan's main training center for military intelligence operations. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be saying Hiroo Onoda's name wrong this entire video, so bear with me. At this school, he studied things like philosophy, history, guerrilla warfare, covert operations, propaganda, etc., etc. They were training him to become a military intelligence officer, and all of these studies would be crucial to his upcoming role. So on December 26, 1944, he was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines to essentially protect the island from enemy attacks. This wouldn't last long, and on February 28, 1945, the U.S. and Philippine forces invaded the island, and most Japanese soldiers either died, went into hiding, or surrendered. But as the United States and Philippine forces were invading this island, Onoda received his last orders from his commanding officer, Yoshima Taniguchi. I probably said that wrong. And his final orders were to stand and fight, so he was never to commit suicide, and he was never to surrender. And he took these orders very seriously. Onoda, who was now lieutenant, ordered 3 enlisted men to come with him and run into the hills into hiding. Over the next few months, Onoda and his men engaged in guerrilla warfare with some of the locals on the island and anybody else that they believed were siding with the Americans and other Allied forces. Eventually, when World War II ended in September of 1945, Onoda and his men found dropped leaflets that were announcing the end of the war. But the men believed that these leaflets were propaganda and trickery from the Allied forces. So they just ignored these leaflets. And eventually more leaflets were dropped, and this time they had signed surrender orders from a general, but the men still considered this disinformation and disregarded the leaflets yet again. They did not believe that World War II had ended. So over the years, the men survived on stolen rice, they scavenged for bananas and coconuts, killed cows for meat, and built bamboo huts for shelter. They survived almost intolerable heat conditions and had to deal with really bad mosquitoes and rodents everywhere. And somehow they even kept their rifles in working condition over the years. 4 years later, in 1949, one of Onoda's men just came out of hiding, wandered through the woods for 6 months, and then eventually surrendered to Filipino forces. He surrendered in 1950. After that, in 1952, letters and photos of family members were dropped into the area that Onoda and his men were suspected of being in an attempt to convince them to surrender, but this didn't even work. Onoda and his men still did not believe that World War II was over. They thought that this was a way to trick them into being captured. In 1954, one of Onoda's men died in a shootout with locals, and then it was just Onoda and one of his men still in hiding. More than a decade later, in October 1972, Onoda's last man was shot and killed by local police. So Onoda was now alone. Fast forward to February 1974, a young Japanese man named Norio Suzuki, who labeled himself a college dropout searching for, quote, Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order, end quote. This man traveled to Lubang Island in the Philippines and just wandered in and started searching for Onoda. And he actually found him. What? It must not have been that hard. Why didn't somebody go out and try to find him before, years before? And so Suzuki just had a conversation with Onoda and ended up convincing him that the war was in fact over, and they ended up becoming pretty friendly. I just picture him walking into the jungle and being like, hey man, the war's been over for quite a long time. You want to maybe come out of the jungle and live your life again? But Onoda would not return back to Japan until he received some sort of official order from a superior officer, which I thought had already been done. So after the meeting, Suzuki returned to Japan and showed pictures of him and Onoda to government officials, told them what Onoda needed in order to return to Japan, and asked that Onoda's commanding officer be located, Yoshimi Taniguchi. I can't say these names. Taniguchi at this time was an owner of a bookstore, and he was just chilling. But when he heard the news that Onoda was still alive, he immediately got on a plane and flew to Lubang Island and met with Onoda on March 9th, 1974. Onoda had officially been declared dead in 1959. So this was years later, and everybody already thought that he was dead. Well, not everybody, because Suzuki went to go find him in the jungle, and he did. Taniguchi handed Onoda his official personal order, which read, quote, "In accordance with the Imperial Command, the 14th Area Army has ceased all combat activity. In accordance with Military Headquarters, Command Number A-2003, the Special Squadron of Staff's Headquarters is relieved of all military duties. Units and individuals under the command of Special Squadron are to cease military activities and operations immediately and place themselves under the command of the nearest superior officer. When no officer can be found, they are to communicate with the American or Philippine forces and follow their directives." End quote. So basically, he was officially and formally relieved of his duty. He handed over his samurai sword while weeping in 1974. I could imagine that would be pretty emotional after spending 29 years in the jungle thinking that you were still at war. Side note, he was still wearing the same uniform that he had originally gone into hiding while wearing. Clothes must have been made so well back then. During his time in hiding, Onoda had killed many civilians. I think it was about 30. So there was talk, as if, should he be punished for this? What should happen? And he was actually pardoned by President Marcos in Manila. Since he had thought that he was still at war when he committed these crimes, he just kind of let him off the hook. And there was a lot of controversy with this decision because he did kill a lot of civilians, and many people thought that he should have to pay for that. He arrived back in Japan at the age of 52, 29 years after the end of World War II. 29 years. Okay, that's insane. When he got back to Japan, he was greeted as a patriot, and he was looked at as a national hero, and his story was everywhere. He was in the news for a long time. It must have been crazy for him too when he returned to Japan, because Japan had changed immensely from the 1940s to the 1970s. So everything probably seemed very futuristic to him, and I just want to know what went through his mind. Did he think it was cool, or was he really freaked out? I want to know. So after his return, he was looked over by doctors, and surprisingly, he was very healthy. He was given a military pension, and then he actually moved to Brazil to raise cattle. Some say that after he returned, Japan was just too much for him with everything that had changed, and he wanted a more laid-back life. And he thought that he could have that in Brazil. So after he moved, he raised cattle. He actually got married in Brazil to a Japanese woman, and he just kind of tried to live a normal life. Eventually, him and his wife did end up moving back to Japan, and they opened up the Onoda Nature School, which was a survival skills youth camp. And it is said that he never once apologized for killing the civilians that he did on his time on Lubang Island. Hiroo Onoda died in 2014 at the age of 91 in Tokyo, Japan. Even though he did get a lot of his years taken away because he was, on the island thinking that the war wasn't over, he still lived to a pretty old age compared to a lot of people. And that is the story of how Hiroo Onoda refused to surrender. He seems to have been the most stubborn man. I feel like to ever be able to survive something like that, you would have to be very stubborn. If I was ever in that situation, the first time I saw a rat, I'd be like, nope, I'm done, see ya, goodbye. And he did that for almost 30 years. The story of Hiroo Onoda is a wild one, and I hope you enjoyed learning about him this week. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you not next Monday, but the Monday after. Bye!